recording the session for those people who will be joining late, right? I guess we'll share the recording anyway. Okay, looks like yeah, you have completed lab 1 and 2. Anyone face any issues? So let me just maybe walk you through, okay? If you can just post the status in chat. Let me know whether you have done it or you face any issue. Even if you have completed it without any issue, just maybe type in the chat so that I know you have done all the labs, okay? All right, so basically, as I said, it's pretty easy to follow the sequence, right? And also, as I said, right, I opened this session before lunch. So if I leave this open for too long, as you can see, right, the session will be gone, right? So that's why I recommend you complete the labs at one go, right? Don't leave a long break in between, and then you will end up like a situation like me. I'm no longer able to access the environments, but if I refresh the page, basically it will give me a new instance, right? It will recreate the environment, give me a new instance, I have to start from the step 1 again, right? So, but the good thing is that I completed the steps before I leave for lunch. So, so even though it's gone, it's okay. If I refresh, it will give me a new environment, right? So this is the issue I talked to you about. So anyway, the lab sequence is pretty easy to follow, right? Probably if you just try to type in the commands, it will just take a few minutes. But of course, I encourage you to read the instructions on the left-hand side. It gives you, I mean, good information about the definition of services routes. Okay, why we're going to explain this afternoon. Okay, and the basic concepts, right? And then basically it's pretty easy to follow, right? So if you start, basically just follow the steps here. Again, this is a visual representation of the services routes consumers concept, right? So you can actually see clearly when you configure service, right? It basically registers the upstream and so on, right? So as I mentioned, right? So this is basically the setup. So launch.sh. So behind the scene is using Docker Compose. So if you want to find more information about how to install Kong, so just go to docs.konghq.com. This link is basically our documentation site where you can find information about, okay, how to do, for example, installation, right? So if you look at here, so depending on what environment you're using, so if you're using Docker, so you can click on this. So basically, if you want to set this up in your own environment, you can follow the steps here, right? So, and it will give you the steps like where to get the Docker image. So this is stored in a private registry. So in order to get access to software, you need to basically request for child will provision a Bintray account to you, where you can download the license file and also get access to the software packages, okay? So you can pull the image from Bintray, you can also download the RPM, and then basically if you look at here, just follow the 8 steps here, you'll get Kong up and running like what we did here, right? So at the end of the process, basically it starts a Kong instance. So if you're interested, like I said, right, look at the Docker Compose file. So there's a YAML file behind. Okay. So here, these are basically basically we provide a script for you. So if you're interested, you can maybe make a copy of the script, right? So probably use that for your testing later, right? If you want to run Kong, you can use this as a template, right? Copy the content out, save it somewhere, and this serves as a template for you to run Kong next time if you want to do a demo or maybe a POC, okay? And then basically, so when we install Kong, basically it's will expose the Kong manager, right? So through the load balancer. So this is the UI, right? You use, and then also in the subsequent steps, basically you can do the configuration either using Call Manager, this one, or use admin API, right? So basically, you can do this by navigating from the workspace, right, to add the service, and then you can create a service, right? So create service here, and then just enter the parameters here, right? So we'll explore this more later, but basically, this is the UI for you to define your service. And you can also do the same thing using admin API approach, right? So you can just copy and paste um, the, uh, um, the command here. So 8001 is the admin API port, okay? So this is as equivalent to create a service from the UI. So UI is actually by default listening on the port 8002, but because we use a load balancer, you don't see the port because we have configured load balancer in front, right? So, but the 8001 is admin port where you can call admin API to basically create services and routes and everything, right? And everything that you can do from UI, right, that can be done using admin API. So admin API is very useful if you want to automate the configuration and also to maybe integrate this with your CI/CD pipeline. Okay. So basically, the next few steps is about setting up route, adding plugin. So we actually so first of all, with a service and route, we get a pass-through proxy. So you basically call the endpoint. So now great, right? But now we need to add some security, right? So with plugin, we can add a, for example, we use a key authentication plugin. We'll actually look at many more plugins later. So all the plugins are available on ConHub, right? So ConHub is where you can find all the plugins available for Con Enterprise, right? So most of the plugins are already packaged. When you install Con, you can see all the plugins are already there. If you try to create a new plugin, so most of the plugins are already there. You can just click enable. Some plugins may be not included. For example, some of the partner plugins, some of the custom plugins, then you can download and install this separately, right? So this is where you can find all the plugins available. We'll talk about plugins more later as well. So basically, and then the next lab 2 basically just continue, and then lab 2 is about maybe just adding a different plugin, right? This is called rate limiting. So rate limiting plugin is more for traffic control. So this is a very common requirement for API gateway. You want to control, because when you open up the API, right? I mean, people can access the API from anywhere, right? So, but your backend system probably was created, provisioned with certain resources. So in order not to overload your system, you can put some rate limits upfront, right? And also this one helps you to define SLA with your partner, right? So and you can also use this for maybe billing charging purpose, right? So the second lab basically is we set up a different plugin, route limiting. Now you can do some tests, right? So and then if you see the rate limits, you get this 429 error. And rate limiting can be applied at a service level. It can also be applied at a consumer level, right? So you can define a different rate limit on a consumer basis, or you can apply a common rate limit for the whole service, right? So it gives you the flexibility how you want to configure the rate limit. Okay, so in a nutshell, I mean the first 2 labs, okay, no problem. I saw some responses. Yeah, okay, good. So yeah, UI based is easier for beginner, right? I mean, at the beginning it's easy to use the UI, but moving forward, if you want to automate this in production, admin API or scripting is better because once you have the scripts, right, you can just run these scripts many times, right, to provision in different environment. If you have a typo, you will know, you fix the typo, and then you can, basically that script, you can check, version control the script as well, right, as part of your configuration. Tomorrow, I think we'll talk about another way to manage configuration as well, right? So it's called declarative configuration. So besides the admin API, you can also put the configuration in a YAML file. So when you so you can export the configuration, you can synchronize this to a different environment. Okay. All right, so first two labs basically just to, I mean, give you access to the lab environment, basically let you get familiar with online environment, try to um, uh, probably use the Com Manager to get to know some of the basic concepts. So in the afternoon, we will revisit some of the core concepts here, right? So especially route services, consumers, and a plugin, right? How to you can use plugin to enforce API security. So there'll be two more hands-on labs. Basically, we're going to test different plugin, for example, OpenID Connect plugin to integrate with external IDP. So we are going to explore some more advanced plugin, right? And then we'll give you enough time to complete the labs, and then at the end of today, we'll just do another quick review, and then that will be all for today, right? So basically, we'll cover some of the basics. Then tomorrow is more around the management and developer portal perspective for tomorrow. So so without any further ado, any last questions before we continue with the afternoon's topic? If you have any questions, you can ask in you can type in chat, or you can just ask. You can turn on your microphone and ask. Okay, no questions? Okay, are we good to continue? Maybe can someone just type yes or okay in the chat so that at least I make sure that I didn't lose you. Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, what happens with Zoom is sometimes I may got disconnected, right? And I keep talking for like 10 minutes and realize that, oh, I have to reconnect. So thanks for the response. Okay, good. Okay, now let's look at the some basic concepts about routes and services and so on, right? So in the labs, basically, you already see some of the concepts. If you refer to the overview, I think we already kind of explained some of the core concepts. But let me just introduce this formally here using this slides here, right? Okay, so some of the core concepts when it comes to gateway, right? So I basically just created a simple some diagrams to illustrate. So this is a situation when you don't have a API gateway, right? So basically, you have the consumer, you have your services, right? So I draw a few different boxes here to represent APIs built in different form, right? Because in a typical enterprise, you have APIs maybe built using modern microservices architecture. You probably implemented a SOA solution, maybe an enterprise service bus for integration purpose, and then you use that to expose some web services. You may be consuming some external application. They expose APIs to you. You may have some legacy application. They also provide some API, maybe in the form of TCP or maybe just HTTP request, right? It may not be in the form of say a web service, SOAP web service or RESTful, but they're using HTTP or TCP as a protocol. So these are different forms of APIs, and then the APIs will be used by consumer. Usually the API consumers here can be another application, right? So application talking to application using API as a standard interface. Of course, today you'll be building more and more mobile apps, right? So typically for enterprises, usually will have a mobile first strategy, right? So because mobile is the primary channel for people to access your service, so probably you want to build a mobile application first, even before the web app, okay? And it could be a partner app, like I mentioned. Maybe this is really a new business model. The example I mentioned previously, we want to, banks start to sell insurance, right? And also maybe, maybe the Grab can integrate with a payment solution using the APIs and so on, right? So I mean, if you look at, again, using Uber or Grab as example, so it's actually a perfect example where you can build a new business model on top of some APIs, right? If you look at the way how Uber is built, it's a mobile app, right? So it's making use of map service, is using service like to send out SMS messages. You use other APIs to make payment, etc. Right? So it's actually a very good example of how you can actually build a new service or solution on top of APIs, right? Maybe from other companies. So same thing can be applied to you, right, as a partner or customer, right? You have APIs available with the capability. Now you can build a new service, right? And or sometimes it could be an end user, right? A good example could be if it's a web application. So today, usually the web application will be built using JavaScript framework, right? So when the JavaScript framework call API, basically JavaScripts are just some static content that will be executed on the browser, on the user's machine, right? So effectively, the end users are making the API calls, themselves, right? So, if you have some very savvy users, they can actually look behind the scene, right? They look at the page source, they look at the, turn on some developer tools, they can see the actual API traffic, right? Going back and forth between the web application and the API. So in this case, it could be end user calling the APIs themselves. They may not be using a Postman or using the curl command like what we did, right? So when they using the JavaScript application, so that API is actually requested from end user themselves, okay? So they can actually look at the actual request, what are the parameters being exchanged and so on. Okay, so this is basically without gateway. So you can see the challenge here. So first, the APIs may be exposed using different endpoints, right? So you end up with maybe different IP port number. The APIs may be exposed in different forms, right? Different format. The security policies are not unified, right? It's all being controlled, handled by individual system. So now if you want to enforce a standard, say we want to use OpenID Connect to secure access, now you have to implement this within each system, which may not be so straightforward, okay? So this is where Kong comes in, right? As, of course, primary function as a gateway, you set up a Kong instance and place that in between the consumer and your systems, right? So Kong cluster, like I mentioned, requires a database to store the configuration. So the configuration make from the Kong manager, whenever you create new services, routes and so on, all the configuration goes into the database, okay? So these are some of the core concepts in the cluster. So you can actually set up multiple workspaces. I'm not sure if you notice, right? When you're doing this, right? We have this workspaces concept, right? There's all a default workspace. So tomorrow we'll talk about this in more details. You can create multiple workspaces, set up role-based access control. So they have a multi-tenancy model. So we'll do this exercise tomorrow to look at the workspace and RBAC. So in each workspace, it's like a tenant, right? You can have a project team or maybe a department having its own workspace. They can create their own service definition, right? So as you know, from lab 1, right, when you register a service, you basically map a particular API endpoint to a service in Kong, right? So when you create a service, basically you will have a list of services with a name, and then the name will be mapped to the API endpoint. So of course here in your environment, you will be maybe certain IP address, port number of your APIs, right? The actual endpoint. So when you create a service, you'll probably notice we do support other protocols, right? So besides HTTP, HTTPS, we support gRPC, TCP as well, okay? So we can proxy other traffic. So service is basically for you to register the API endpoints into Kong. but service doesn't give consumer a way to access, right? So if you recall in lab 1, the next step is you need to create a route, okay? So you need to create route, and the route usually is created based on service. So if you create a service here, usually the route is associated with the service, right? So you can say I want to add a route for this service. So this is how basically route and service will have this kind of matching, right? So route basically provides a way for a consumer to come in, right? This is the entry point. Okay, the reason why we decouple service and route, actually, if you ever played around with Kong in the earlier version, we only have one concept called API, right? We didn't decouple service and route. So the reason why we decouple these two is because potentially you may have a common service which may be exposed to multiple entry points, right? So it could be a common service, but you have a route for maybe, say, internal developers. The external partners will have different routes, right? So routes give you the flexibility to basically match the request. So the relationship between route and service is that a route, a service can have more than one route, okay? That's usually how it works. So, but in most cases, a route is probably just one-to-one, right? So a route is mapped to a service. So in route, you basically define different parameters. So this is basically defines how you will match the request, right? So basically you say, you specify whether the user will access through HTTP or HTTPS protocol. You probably can define a host name, right? So if your API gateway serve multiple domain, so you can say, so each route maybe will match with a different domain name, right? So you can put a domain. This is, of course, is optional. If you don't put a domain, you will just try to match. It doesn't matter whichever domain you use, right? And then you can also say match a particular HTTP method. So you can say at least one only match with get, the other one maybe match with post. Reason being, maybe for the same service, get and post, maybe the security policies are different, right? Anyone can do a get. You don't add a plugin on get, but for the post, it's an update, right? And then you want to only allow authenticated user with the right permission to do update function, for example. So this gives you flexibility in setting up multiple routes and then having different security policies, right? So even though it could be a common service. Okay, so service and routes are two basic concepts in Kong, right? So this is how they work and what's the relationship. So the next one is, okay, so we will talk about Dev Portal tomorrow. You can actually enable Dev Portal on a per workspace basis. So this one gives you capability to publish API contract. So we'll talk about Dev Portal tomorrow afternoon, right? So you can enable a Dev Portal for each workspace. Okay, the next one is a plugin, right? So if you enable plugin, for example, I want to enable say key authentication. So each plugin has a scope, right? So it can be a global plugin. It can also be scoped to a particular service. So when you define a global plugin, means this plugin will be applied to all services and routes. So one typical example is if I want to log the request, right? So we have a login plugin. So for example, if you look down the list in Kong Hub, right? We have a login plugin. If we want to capture the logs, right? So we typically configure this as a global plugin so that all the requests to all service and routes will be captured in a centralized a login solution, right? So here I'm just using two examples, Splunk and Elasticsearch, but it doesn't matter what solution you use, right? So eventually the logs will be captured in one of these formats, right? Depending on the plugin you use. You can capture the logs in file. You can send the logs to HTTP endpoints. You can publish the logs to Kafka. So basically, you can use any way to capture the logs, right? So the other side, which will basically receiving the logs and store the logs, basically they will either get the logs from the file or receive the logs from a HTTP address, right? So using one of the methods, all the logs will be captured and then centralized, right? So this is actually very important because when you deploy Kong in a decentralized environment, Kong can run anywhere, right? Kong, you may have multiple instances, multiple clusters running on premise and cloud, but you probably want to have a single view. I want to see how the APIs are being consumed, what is the status, what are the latency, and so on, right? So it's very important to collect the logs in a central location for management purpose, and you can also perform some analytics, okay? And another plugin where we usually use for global plugin is monitoring. So same thing here, the performance metrics, we want to capture this, for all the services and routes. So plugin can also be configured on a service and route level. As I mentioned here, we configure a plugin. So you can also say, I want to scope the plugin on a particular service or a particular route. And some plugin can be configured even on the consumer, right? So in lab 1, we have seen, no, actually lab 2, when we configure rate limiting, we configure the plugin on the service, and then we configure the plugin on consumer, right? So just to show you the difference. So some plugin, especially rate limiting, you actually want to maybe apply different rate limits on based on the consumer, right? Who is calling. So the plugin can be configured at a service level, route level, or consumer level, right? So depending on the plugin you see. So for example, key authentication is only have the scope of service and route. But if I choose a plugin like say rate limiting, right? So if it's a rate limiting plugin, I can have 3 scopes here, right? The rate limiting plugin can be applied to service, route, or consumer. So basically, usually this is all optional, right? So you can specify only one of these, or maybe 2 of these or 3, right? So we'll try to match as much as possible, so you can have a combination of 1 or 2 or 3 of them, okay? So the plugin on a service and route level usually is more to configure security policies based on the actual API, right? Because some service you may want to use OpenID Connect, right? So, and then you just enable the OpenID Connect plugin on the particular service and route. Maybe another plugin, like I mentioned, if it's maybe read-only request, and if the data don't change very often, you can choose to cache it, right? For example, if you try to get customer transaction history. So transaction history don't change very often, right? So probably can cache that for a short duration of time. So you can actually configure that on a particular service for inquiry kind of services, okay? And last but not least, right, on top of that, each platform we set up, there will be a few common components. There's a COM manager. So COM manager basically is the interface you are seeing, right? So it's a management UI. So from here, you can access to dev portal feature, which we don't enable, but we will enable in the tomorrow's lab. We have a vitals function where you can monitor the performance. So I think, yeah, because I just started this environment, and so there's not much data. But if you keep testing the platform, you can see you can actually measure the request and latency that comes in. So we have some security components. So these are option components if you want to enhance the security. So more for network threat detection and some of the automation capability. Okay. So so with this, right, I mean, this concept is really straightforward. Just more of a recap and review. We already seen some of this in the lab, but we just want to make it clearer here. And if you want to find more information about the plugin, so in the subsequent labs, right, we are going to use more and more plugins, right? So if you want to find more information about plugins, so just come to Kong Hub, right? Let me just paste a link here. So this is a very useful link that you should always basically Kong Hubs gives you a list of plugins available. And also what is important is that you want to find out how to configure a particular service plugin. You just click on this one. For example, if you want to cache the result, right? If you click on the plugin, it leads you to the documentation, right? So basically behind we have explanation about what this plugin is about, right? So provides a reverse proxy cache implementation. And then there's some examples here. Again, we provide examples using admin API. So if you want to do this using command line, we have, okay, so this is another approach we will probably talk about tomorrow. You can use a declarative manner, put the configuration in the YAML file to configure the plugin, right? And then, so first you need to enable plugin on service or on route, okay? So if you look at, this is admin APIs, depending on whether it's service or route, you will actually use different API accordingly. And then you, okay, of course you can configure this as a global plugin, then you don't specify any service and route. So here it gives you a detailed description about the parameter, right? So when you configure plugin, for example, I want to enable caching plugin, so proxy cache. Okay, so if you're not sure about, okay, what is the meaning of TTL, right? So probably can guess TTL is time to leave. But if you want to get confirmation, so there's actually a detailed here, right? So basically the cache entities in seconds, right? How long the the entities will be kept in the cache. So basically it's a parameter to configure the expiry timeout. By default, the entities will be cached for 5 minutes, and then after 5 minutes, it will be removed from cache, and they will get the results from the upstream API. And then this one, for example, this parameter cache control means, okay, do you respect the cache control in the request header, right? So when you send a request, you can put a cache control, see whether you want to basically ignore cache or not. And strategy basically means how do you want to, what store do you want to store the use for the caching? So you can use either memory. So memory means you use the const memory, or it can be Redis, right? So Redis basically means you are using an external Redis cluster, right? So here, if you choose Redis, you must provide the Redis address, right? So basically, you will store the cached entities in the external Redis service or Redis cluster. Okay. So basically, so this link basically gives you a very detailed documentation about the plugin. For example, the way how we calculate the key to store the cache. So by default, it's calculate MD5 value of the UUID and method and request, right? So it's a unique string, right, to represent the request. So if I just firing the same request over and over again, you use the same key and then to retrieve the entity. So of course here, the key, you can configure a different key as well, right? So there's actually a hash. Just trying to find the parameter. It's based on headers or query parameters. So basically, I think what she's trying to say is that you can, if you don't want to use this as a default key, okay, so you can basically choose to use the header, right? So that means you can use either a particular header as a key or use a query parameter, right? So for example, if I'm querying the same customer ID, right? So you can say our customer ID will be the value will be the key. So if you have multiple customers trying to look for the same customer ID or maybe product ID, and maybe so the cache can be shared, right? So it's not really cached on a per request basis. So by default, it's cached on a request basis, but you can change the behavior by setting the parameter. So you can actually refer to the link here to basically to understand how each plugin works, right? So because here it doesn't give you a lot of description, so that's where you will need to refer to the documentation, okay? So I think that is basically the key concepts in Kong that I want to talk about in this afternoon. And so I think most importantly is really the plugin, right? So there are so many plugins. So in the labs this afternoon, we will be looking at different other plugins, right? For example, Lab Tree, we'll look at other security plugin. We'll look at how you can integrate with OpenID Connect, for example, which is a quite very useful feature for you. And then we'll look at the if you have a Kubernetes deployment, we'll see how this thing works as well. So again, we'll be doing labs in the afternoon from so now is 2:08. So we are slightly ahead. So hopefully we can wrap up earlier. So since we are a bit ahead of time, so what I suggest is so from 2 to say let's bring this forward to half an hour, right? So we complete this. Let me just adjust the timing accordingly so that we'll know what time we will regroup, right? So 1:45 to 2:10, we completed this session. So what I will suggest is from 2:15, right, to maybe 3:30, right? Let's work on the labs, and then we try to, do the wrap up and review. So we try to finish maybe half an hour earlier so that we give you some time to come back for a day as well, right? So we can work on other things. So same thing again. Okay, for lab 3 and lab 4, just continue here. So we look at security, right? So just continue to look at the labs. What's this one is my okay. So we are at access control list. So let's I think ACL. No, actually we are doing OpenID Connect, right? So OpenID Connect. If you need more information, again, come to this link here. Come to ConHub and then look for OpenID Connect. So OpenID Connect is a very popular plugin that you can use to integrate with external identity provider. If you need to support like OAuth 2.0, OpenID Connect 1.0, basically any identity provider that supports the standard, you can use this plugin. We have tested the plugin with many IDP here, but definitely this is not the complete list, right? Any solution that you know that supports the same standard, you can use this plugin to integrate. So, and this is actually a recommended approach, especially for enterprise, right? You need to have a solution to help you to manage identity, right? Things like provisioning accounts, decommissioning of the user accounts, setting up the password policies, and so on and so forth, right? So, of course, yeah, Azure AD is a common solution. You can also use other solution for such as more for single sign-on purpose as well, right? So once you sign on, you get a token. That token can be used to access other APIs and services. So in lab 3, we're going to look at how to use the OpenID Connect. So same thing here. Go to the link. Follow the instruction here. Yeah, we have a very detailed description. So again, so we'll look at authentication using different flow. We will also look at authorization, right? So actually, these are really some of the advanced topics and also very useful. So we do provide some additional links as well, right? So if you click on this, we'll actually provide to you like this is the same link. Yeah, same link I showed you just now, right? So in the lab, you actually see more information as well. So so let's spend some time from now until 3:30. We'll be doing lab 3 and 4, and 3:30 will again regroup and we'll just go through the labs and maybe answer some questions. But before we break for labs, do you have any questions that you want to ask? So far so good. Any
Yeah, so far so good.
Okay, sounds good. Then in that case, let's just okay. Let's do the labs then. And as I mentioned, We are slightly ahead of time, so I adjusted the time accordingly. So we will wrap up today's session at 4 p.m. We'll do the review at 3:30, right? Just take note of the time, right? So we'll resume this session at 3:30, and then we'll end today's session at 4. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you so much.